and they're starting to feel burned out. And so we think about this in terms of what Lucky does regarding teacher retention, because we want our teachers to stay and move forward, but we need to give them supports. And so when thinking about supports, I'm thinking strategically about making sure they have training and have the technology, have broadband, but that training shouldn't be done on their own. It needs to be done during the school hours, because otherwise they're doing trainings on their own at night and they might not have that level of support. And we really have to think strategically about making sure that not just giving them asynchronous trainings, that it is an interactive opportunity for them to network still and to be mentored, and those really important fundamental things. The last project that we have been running is called an ECHO. It is a medical model for professional development, and it is a distance delivered, used on Zoom, so using the same platform we have right here, framework. And so we took the Project ECHO model from the University of New Mexico, and I know you have a number of ECHOs in New York State. So this might be very familiar for you, but we've been doing that with teachers, special ed teachers who work with students with emotional behavior disorders in one district, and provided them with 5 ECHO sessions. One ECHO had to be canceled due to a tornado. Those are things you don't have to worry about in New York, but we have them in South Carolina. But we brought the teachers together and we're looking at those data. Yesterday was our last ECHO session. And I just read some of the qualitative data, and they felt as though it was a wonderful opportunity to receive condensed information and network. And so I think that they really missed being together as a group of special ed teachers who all work with students with behavioral disorders. And they really missed those opportunities to connect and to share stories and to help each other. Okay.
I just added in the chat box, the Card Center, I believe the University of Albany or at Albany, as well as the University of Rochester, they're working together to offer Project ECHO within New York State. I know they've had some hiccups related to funding, but I believe they are still doing it. And I echo what Shanna said. It's a great way for teachers and related service providers, family members to engage in professional development in a really collaborative way and not just sit and get. So I'm going to move on to our next question. JT or Shanna, whichever, whoever wants to speak first, what were some of the innovative solutions you observed from caregivers and teachers in some of the work that you've done?
I'll jump in. So again, as I mentioned before, at the beginning of the kind of shutdown and kind of rethinking how we're doing instruction for students, I went to visit some former students of mine who are teachers now in different districts and asked them, what are they doing? Was there anything they needed that I could help them and support them in any kind of way? And I remember talking to one of my students. He's at a high school. He teaches a learning support kind of across disabilities, and his name is Jake. And what he told me was when the school shut down, his concern was, okay, we're pausing school for however long a time, and we're trying to reconfigure, instruction for this remote model and all that kind of things. And he said, what I want to do is give my students, and this is a quote, a soft landing. And I was like, what does that mean? What is a soft landing? And he went on to kind of explain that what he meant by that was, how can he plan for his students so when they do come back, and however means that looks or however delivery system he has to do it, how can I reintroduce them to a daily routine when the routines are so different? Or how can I reintroduce my expectations, which I had already established through the year, through the school year, and now we kind of have to reconfigure that and reestablish that because we're doing something different. And he talked about how he had students who had a difficult time with transitions or had a difficult time with changes, and he wanted to make sure that he developed a quote unquote soft landing for them when they did come to class via Zoom or Google Classroom or whatever it was, that they are eased into the process again and kind of reestablishing these things. And he basically kind of redid in the middle of a school year what he would do in the beginning of a school year. And that was kind of his, like he said, his soft landing, his landing strip. I also asked him my mom, because as I said, I was really concerned about my mom transitioning, particularly, and we're going to get to a question about kind of inequities. And again, I'm from rural Mississippi, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. But what she told me is, and again, this is a quote, because I apparently hang out with people who make up really cool statements. She said, "I'm going to remix my accessibility." And I was like, okay, that sounds cool. What does that even mean? And she went on to say some of the things that she was doing, which was making herself and making the materials for her students. And she's an inclusive teacher, so she has, gen ed and students with exceptionalities in her classroom. But how do I make my stuff accessible when we're doing something different? And I know that I have students who don't have access to computers, or they're trying, since it's second grade, and they're trying to do school on a cell phone, which, so I wanted a little bit more thought of what she was doing. So, and this is kind of some of the things that she said she was doing, was remixing her accessibility by getting in contact with parents and scheduling to meet them at like the Dollar General, so she could talk to them one-on-one. I got to go to the Dollar General anyway. I might as well meet people while I'm there and talk to them about their kid. Or I remember I was talking to her one day and she kicked me off the phone and she was like, "Yeah, it's packet time." And I was like, "What's packet time?" She had parents coming by the house, my childhood home, to pick up packets for their kids. And she scheduled the time and was just sitting on the front porch, waiting on parents to come by to pick up these packets. And she was like, "Yeah, I'm remixing over here. I'll talk to you later." So she ushered me off the phone so she can remix herself, which was very cool. But those are two things, like this idea of having a soft landing, I thought was very interesting, coming from Jake, and then talking to my mom, who was always full of wisdom, kind of remixing her accessibility. And I thought those were two really cool and innovative ways to think about how to transition from, our traditional setup to whatever setup we were doing and wherever we were, because they both had very different experiences when it came to come to their schools transitioning and the access or resources their districts had.
Can you provide an example of one of the strategies or skills that Jake provided for the soft landing, and what grade did he teach again?
So he's in high school, so he has mostly, I think, 9th and 10th grade. So what he really talked about was kind of, how am I reestablishing this development of these expectations and daily routines? So one of the things he created was a Google form that kind of was a basically check in, check out type of thing, that he did electronically, as opposed to what he usually does, which is kind of in person. But he talked about his development of that. He also developed we developed a kind of a report card, daily behavior report card that was electronically done, that, kind of what Shanna said with her kids. I mean, I'm sorry, or maybe Lucky, you said about going outside. Yes, it was. So we set up a kind of a electronic daily behavior report card for his students. So, one, they didn't have to, again, we're going to talk about this a little bit later, about the freeing aspect of being remote a little bit. But he said the one thing that he wanted to make sure that he did was reinforce the idea that, having a routine is important, and what that routine looks like, and having these expectations are important, and what those expectations are going to look like now that we're doing a different delivery model.
Shanna, you want to add?
Sure. So I love the remix and the soft landing. I'm going to definitely pull that through other work that we do, and I'll cite your mom. So, one of the things that I see as a strength and as innovation has been really these deeper, more meaningful connections that teachers have been making across large districts. So I work with a district that's 800 square miles, and we have like, oh gosh, I think the number of students is like 95,000 students in our district. And so we have teachers that are coming from all over, and students transition from school to school. But now that we're doing everything remotely, teachers are able to join. It is through our ECHO network, but they're coming together once a week, and they were able to connect in a way that in traditional professional development, they might not have been able to connect. And I've heard multiple conversations from teachers that say, you know, even yesterday, like, I understand what you're saying. I have a student currently in my class that's exhibiting these challenges. And you know what? Actually, this kid's coming to you next year. And so these conversations that should that were previously going on are now were going on, you know, maybe in the summer. They're happening in the spring because we're using technology to bring folks together. I do think that in addition to teachers connecting, we're seeing a lot more parent communication, and that's something that I really hope remains, that parents are critical. You are at the table, your input is valued, and everything that we know about best practices that we have learned this year in terms of sharing information that is accessible, right? Being able to provide information, directions in a student's home language so the parent can help them with homework is so important. Making sure our videos are closed captioned. Those are things that need to continue. In terms of making sure that our content is accessible for everyone and folks feel like they belong, right? Like, I think parents as stakeholders have oftentimes felt as though they are an outsider and an observer in their child's education, whereas we have really put the parent or the caregiver or the remote learning manager or pod person as the center of a child's learning. And those are things that need to keep. I also have seen, as my own kids have now transitioned back to school, my favorite thing is always giving my kids a hug in the morning, telling them, concentrate, have a great day. And, you know, then I drive off. However, I can't do that anymore because now I have to get out. I have to walk my kids up to the school. Somebody greets me and my child and says, how are you doing today, Eli? Let me check in. Are you feeling okay? You know, let me take your temperature. And so although these are COVID health checks, I want those to remain. I think these are wellness checks. These are opportunities that parents can connect with a teacher, connect with a principal, connect with whoever it is that's checking in their child and say, you know what, he didn't sleep well last night, or we just got back from, you know, grandma's house and he ate a ton of sugar or something like that. Like, those are the things that are really important. And you can have that like 30-second check-in. It's efficient. And so that's why I have on the screen in front of you the health check-in that's going on. I feel like it needs to stay. And, you know, we've been able to reconfigure our drop-offs and our pickups. And I really think that that's so important. So as we're looking at 2021, please continue to have those wellness checks. Thank you, Steve. Yeah, like, let's move them from health checks to wellness checks and just keep them there as those, you know, another touch point, another communication. It's non-contingent. A kid didn't have to do anything to get attention. He didn't have to act out. Like, my kid is like Mr. Attention-seeking behaviors. Like, and he gets to walk in first thing in that morning and he's like, I got a joke for you. And he tells his joke. And it just starts off, I think our days are started off better when we are greeted by somebody outside the doors.
I love that. You gave me chills.
Oh.
You know, I want to move us to the next question, though I do think we've touched on this in different ways. But, you know, are there other ways that you've seen technology serving as an asset? But then also, I think there's definitely the dirty underbelly of how technology has also further perpetuated inequities in schools and school settings that, you know, perhaps we can address and even identify ways that maybe we can change that. Who would like to speak first?
Shanna, I'll let you go first.
Okay, well, I was like pointing to you, but I'm unmuted, so I'll just roll. Okay, so I pulled a bunch of data because that's where my mind goes first. Like, what are these inequities? And so I think these data have been shared multiple times, but I think it's important to continue to bring up that these inequities remain related to the technology that students have. We need to make sure, you're right, we need affordable, high-speed broadband that is available in rural areas. Like, it is something that we continue to struggle with in South Carolina, but I know it is everywhere. But so many students don't have internet at home. And so the new federal communications FCC chair has been talking a lot about this homework gap that we're seeing. So it used to be we would have, the digital divide, but students are now tech savvy, but they don't have access to homework. They don't have access to devices at home or broadband at home to support their homework. So in April of 2020, 17% of students didn't have access to laptops or desktops, computers at home. And so we know that students with disabilities, 35% of them minimally or did not participate in any remote learning in the spring of 2020. And so those gaps, I think, like, if we're providing instruction to some, we're not providing instruction to all. And thinking about those gaps that remain and how we're going to have to be able to provide services to kids to help them along. I also, I've talked a little bit about the technology being an asset for teachers, but I also think we have to let teachers have time off from technology and students have time off from technology, because we're using technology for everything that we're doing. I mean, I don't wear glasses, but these are my blue light glasses because my eyes are tired. I get headaches, and I'm sure you all do too. And so I think we have to think about how that could be challenging for teachers and be an issue for students too. I've heard of a lot of issues related to kids that don't transition off of technology, and just removing the device that might cause withdrawal for some kids that have been on YouTube for a really long time, that have been fixated and watching lots of videos over and over. So we have to be strategic, and we have to teach kids how to monitor their own technology and how to self-regulate their technology use. But I do think, going back to the inequalities, like, we can't just continue to push things out and expect for people to respond. We have to really look at what are people accessing, what devices they have, what internet they have available, and be strategic about supporting our families.
That's really good. That was really good. I'm going to start with talking about some assets, and I think Lucky alluded to it when she talked about, her kids in their pod and the young lady who she felt were doing better, this year due to kind of being in that structured environment and not having to go to kind of the traditional school. There are some students who have thrived. Like, I've talked to plenty of teachers and parents who have been, pleasantly surprised and head over heels about the fact that their kid did great in doing remote instruction for various reasons, whether it's the autonomy and that worked for them, or the lowered social pressure and a bunch of other things that they kind of give credence to. One thing I do know is that Pennsylvania has what they call the PA Cyber Charter, and it is basically remote instruction before we had to do it, due to health reasons. And their enrollment went up a lot of percent. And I suspect that it'll probably level off, but it'll still remain pretty high just because there's so many parents who discovered this as an option for their kid. And, it worked out for them, and they feel like they would want to continue to do it this way. On the flip side of that, of course, there are inequalities. And let me just say, like I said, my mom teaches in rural Mississippi, and so does my sister. However, I've taught in various cities and urban settings, and the problems exist there as well. I was talking to a friend of mine in Seattle, and she is a middle school teacher for behavior and learning supports, and she had a number of students who were trying to do this work over, not just over a cell phone, but over a cell phone with just the mobile connection and not like internet access, and just the difficulties in that, or not having any type of device to do this on, and I you have to keep in mind kind of what the populace of people have. So 80% of people with cell phones have Android cell phones. So what does that mean in thinking about what that looks like? And we're talking about, is their Android or even their Apple or iPhone, how old is it? Will it even be able to do these things that we're asking them to do? And all of this has been exacerbated kind of by pandemic teaching and trying to figure out what are ways to make this work. I will say that the problems that are in rural Mississippi, rural Alabama, rural Iowa, rural Minnesota, rural Pennsylvania, probably rural New York are very similar. Some different aspects and changes, but they're going to be the same inequalities kind of across these areas, just because those inequalities exist due to that circumstance. And what can we do? I've been impressed with some school districts because they've been able to at least try to provide, and I will say this, most districts have been very, I wouldn't say proactive, but they've been very active in trying to, accommodate teachers and accommodate students as best they can with the resources they have available. In watching schools provide modems and inexpensive laptops or Chromebooks or something to that effect, it just really depends on what is available to any particular student or any particular school district that they can provide. It's just, unfortunately, it goes down to a money issue, as most things do. How much money can they allocate and afford to do these things? Does the school district have that access? There was a question in the chat that I really wanted to see. It was about data, because whether data about students who can engage. I don't know what the national data looks like, but I will say that it's just happenstance that this week, one of the courses I teach this semester is what we call a capstone course for our pre-service teachers who are graduating in special education, and they have to do a research project to graduate. One student was doing a research project on engagement for their students during remote instruction. And it was interesting just looking at her data and what she found. It was that there was a student who was receiving services for ADHD, and she was engaging with that student one-on-one via remotely, and she knew when he was off task. And her whole thing was to get him back on task. And he would, as what high school students do, he would either lie about not being on task, or he would stall because she would say, "Oh, share your screen. Let me see what you're doing." He'd be like, "Hold on, I'll share with you in a minute," when he was off task. And, we were really trying to figure out what are ways to keep that particular student on task. And we came up with a couple of different things, and they worked with varying success. And I think that's whatever it's going to be. There's no kind of one set in intervention or strategy that's going to work for all students. It really just depends on a number of different factors. Kind of, if we think about what is the activity that they're doing, maybe it's one of those non-preferred activities where they really hate it, and it's going to be hard to keep them on track anyway. Or do we have something to incentivize the fact that they should stay engaged? Do we have a strong enough incentive for them to want to be engaged? Or do we have some sort of mechanism in place for the students to, if you are engaged for this amount of time, then you get to or in a YouTube video or something to that effect. So it really depends on kind of the structures we have in place when it comes to that particular thing. And it's going to look different for each student just because interest matters, motivation matters. Technology is sometimes the issue in itself. So all of these factors conspire together to really either help or hinder kind of if students can stay engaged. And that was just one question from the chat that I wanted to jump on, but there's so many. So I don't know how we figure that out, but well, I'm sure we're going to figure that out.
And I just want to echo what JT was saying. And I have a similar student, a similar situation, but she was asked to be a long-term sub as her student teaching placement, and was put into a situation where she had 8 or 9 kids that she was supposed to be providing resource room support to, who during the spring or during the fall semester, there were a slew of short-term subs filling in because the teacher had some medical issues and whatnot. And so she walked into a situation where the kids were completely disengaged, and coming to me and asking, how do I get them to reconnect? And she was amazing. She has reached out to the families and tried to connect with the families. She's planned her lessons around their interests and really tried to build their interests into the math lesson, the writing lesson. And I really think it's going to take those extra steps to re-engage a lot of our students. And it's something that I know that I'm concerned about, the lack of engagement and how hard it will be to bring some kids back who have completely disengaged and have found the remote instruction not reinforcing to them. One of the other questions was about the idea of, is there any data on students who could not or would not engage? I think there's a lot of work being done right now to try to quantify, that gap. But I also want to point out, as we're trying to be a little bit positive, there have been lots of efforts by teachers to assist and work with families in ways that we never did in the past, that have helped kids who maybe at a first glance or last March, last April, we thought never would be able to engage in remote learning. But the teacher has helped the parents or the caregiver, the grandmother, the tutor, the whoever it is, to help the student to overcome whatever challenges and allow the kid to use eye gaze, their materials, to use all these different ways to engage that perhaps we didn't think would be possible, but now it was possible. Not for every kid, not for every situation, not for every household, but there are examples of ways that this has actually helped to build collaboration. The families feel more in tune with the school district and the schools, that I think is something to learn from and to focus on as well, or to hold up as a good thing. I'm going to move on to our next question unless somebody wants to add in anything. So the next question we have is, from your experience and perspective, how have districts sought to overcome? Like, what are some of the things that you've seen districts do? And I think we've highlighted a couple of these things, but Shanna, maybe do you want to start us out? Some things that you've seen?
So I'll speak first to my own experience as a mom, and then talk a little bit about what else I've seen happening in schools. So we ended up switching. I moved my kids in August to move out to Colorado and live with my in-laws for 7 months, because we figured, you know what, if we're remote and we have 2 little kids, we need help. We're not in this alone. And in the county that they lived in, schools were opening because there was only 200 cases of COVID at that time. And it was 75% of the students in the building are native Spanish speakers. So we were a minority for the first time, and it was a really powerful experience. But what I saw happen was every communication came home in both languages, and work was oftentimes in Spanish. And sometimes I had to be like, hey, I actually need some help here. And the teachers would get on Zooms with us, and because they were doing the high flex thing, so half the week was home, half the week was in school. It was a hot mess for a little while, but we made it through. But was really nice and really empowering for me as a parent was how accessible the teachers were. And so we were able to have instruction both in English and in Spanish, but also be able to hop into an afternoon Zoom with a teacher, and they would talk through some of the asynchronous work that my child was struggling with. So I do think that, these are some things that have helped, just being able to have some parent meetings, have more opportunities, almost like those open houses. I do think that, one big thing that we have now become much more common with is those check-ins. And JT talked a little bit about a point sheet, check-in, check-out. So one thing that I saw a teacher using was a check-in for her kids that were on remote learning. Every morning they completed that. And it was like, how are you feeling today? Are you, what do you need? And then when can I call you? And so or how can I reach you today? And so it gave the students an opportunity to say, you know what, I don't have a device today. Can you call my mom's cell phone or call my aunt's phone? And they were able to put in the phone numbers and call each other. And that was something that we saw in our survey too, was that the majority in the spring of 2020, the majority of teachers were using phone, not email, to connect with students and to connect with parents. And so I do think that, being able to connect doesn't necessarily just have to be emails or videos, but it can be, picking up the phone to call, because I think that's that social interaction that kids long for, and parents miss too. One of the other things that I've seen is that I've had schools that have had a lot of, we've been looking deep into discipline data. And so I've talked with two different schools, one in Colorado and one in South Carolina, and both have said, well, our referrals are down. And I'm like, why are your referrals down? Well, we spent a lot of time this year talking about expectations and really teaching those expectations and reinforcing those expectations positively. So using points or tickets or class-wide contingencies. But our students know those expectations and they are reinforced. And so we're not seeing behavior issues. And kids also had to keep some space. So that might have been something. But one of the things that I saw at a school that has, and we've been looking deep into their discipline data and doing a lot of work around why there are certain write-ups for certain populations. So they had a higher rate of students that are Black and male with disabilities that were receiving in-school suspensions. And when we looked at the data recently, that had dropped. And I said, well, what do you think it is? And they said, well, we are teaching all the time behavior. And so I think a lot of times our behavioral expectations are taught in the beginning of the year and then they're not revisited. And kids need those reminders and need to, be invited back to share what they think about the expectations. Are they fair? Do we need to change certain things? Do we need to adjust them? And getting student input along the way has been really powerful. And making sure that we're continuing to look at those data. I think one thing that this year has taught us all is that one size fits all does not work. We need to really disaggregate these data and look at student populations and see, are there overrepresentation of students with disabilities or a student of color that we need to address? And so I think that one way that schools are seeking to overcome this is by really taking a deep dive into the data and having hard conversations. I'll pass the wand.
I was gonna say you stole my answer, but yeah, it's funny listening to Shanna talk about this thing because both of us are, at heart behaviorists and, really lean into kind of, the idea of classroom management, even though I try to avoid calling it classroom management or behavior management. In fact, my course I teach that course, and I don't even call it that. I call it motivational strategies, because the idea is that we're, trying to motivate students, and in turn, hopefully, eventually get them to motivate themselves, right? And a lot of school districts have put a renewed focus on that kind of thing, because at some point they've recognized the limitations of doing remote instruction or even hybrid instruction when it comes to kind of motivating students to stay engaged or to complete assignments or stay on task or something to that effect. And I appreciate the fact that they're doubling down on certain things. I still find it interesting to see certain things happen. In fact, the school district that I live in now, which is the State College Area School District, was kind of in the news a little bit because of I'll just say a friend of mine whose child was doing remote instruction. Their child was not engaged, and the teacher put her child in, what she call it, a digital timeout room or something. And I don't know if you saw, so she tweeted about it, and apparently Whoopi Goldberg saw her tweet and put it on The View, and it turned into a big thing. And I contacted her because she's a friend of mine, and I was like, what is this? And she was like, she goes through the whole thing, and it led to conversations about, how to do discipline when it comes to remote instruction. And to me, the heart of that question, and some people dug into it, was, what should engagement look like for remote instruction? Is it going to look the same as it did when we were in person, or are there nuances that we need to consider? And is the idea of a student not being engaged worth punishment to be put in a digital timeout room? And what does that mean, and what does that look like? And those conversations will remain and will have to exist and have to continue, because even though we've been doing this for over a year now, it's not perfect, and we're still trying to figure out what are going to be the best practices and strategies for keeping students engaged, or for understanding how discipline can and should work. These are all questions are evolving, and these are all evolving answers. And as technology changes, and even with Zoom, if you have a school that was using Zoom, think about what Zoom was a year ago and what it is now. It's light speed better, because they've had to adjust on the fly, because now instead of having 10 million people using Zoom, you have 100 million. So that means we have to do something different, whether it's adding closed caption, which they didn't have at first, or making some other accessibility things happen. Maybe they were planning on doing it, but now they have to do it. And it's the same thing is going to be for teaching and instruction, and school districts is going to be a lot less learning on the fly, but still a little bit of learning on the fly, because there are other nuances, and students are different. Students need different types of support, and how those supports can look are evolving and changing, and will continue to as we do whatever we're going to do in the fall, however school is going to look. So I think for the most part, school districts have been trying, and some have been really succeeding, and others have been evolving, and we'll all continue to evolve, whether as a parent trying to make sure your student or your child is getting services, or as teachers trying to do the best services they can. I would say this, one of the coolest and funniest things I saw was a video of a teacher who was teaching remotely, but she was in school, and she was dressed completely as Baby Shark. Like she had a entire shark, not just a head. She was in a shark costume, and that made me feel good because it made me see that there are teachers, a lot and millions of them, who are trying really hard to do this well. And, and that's some of the best we can ask for.
Agreed. I think we have time for one more question. So in what ways do you see districts and teachers learning from the pandemic, as well as other events from the past year, such as increased awareness of things like systemic racism, and as they try to create more responsive and inclusive classrooms for all students? I think there are lots of really great examples of ways that districts will be able to move forward and to really, create more inclusive with using the technology that they've now learned. And, I think the one example that many of us probably have seen in a variety of ways is the increased attendance at parent conferences and IEP meetings. I know I have a student teacher who's also a parent, and she asked me with like bated breath, like, do you think they're still going to allow us to do Zoom IEP meetings? And like really excited that she could, as a teacher, be able to attend her child's IEP meeting without having to take a day off or a half day. So, what are some of the things, because that is an inequity, that we have these meetings that are held during the school day when not all parents can attend. So what are some of the things that we might be learning that will help us and support these efforts as we move forward?
I think that that's a great point. I also think meetings have become a lot more efficient. I was talking with a speech pathologist the other day, and she's like, hang on, I gotta go run, a portion of an IEP meeting, and was back in, 30 minutes. And I think before she probably wouldn't have been able to attend, similar to your story, Lucky. I'd like to talk about the increased awareness to systematic racism. I think that has been something that we have known, obviously have experienced different incidents, or been in a classroom and have seen practices that are unjust, or apparent. But I do think that these are becoming district level conversations that used to just be left to one group of people. And I do think that, districts are really evaluating their practices for who are they hiring? Are these equitable decisions in terms of suspensions? I definitely was I had a learning disability growing up, and I was an aggressive kind of kid and would, skip classes and whatnot, but I was never put in a restraint or anything. And I do think that it has a lot to do with my, the color of my skin. And I think about, kids that I was with growing up that were not as fortunate. And I think a lot of people are looking at themselves, looking at their experiences, thinking deeply about their own past and how to make a better future. And I think we're looking at different roles across districts. One of the districts I work with, an outside partner facilitated a book club. And so the book club was Beverly Tatum's Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria? And the nonprofit provided 300 books to teachers, administrators, community members, whoever wanted to be there, and showed up every week on Zoom for 6 weeks. And it was a structured book club that gave teachers, leaders, parents, bus drivers an opportunity to come together and to discuss topics related to racism and systematic inequalities. And I think that just bringing people together and having these conversations, although they may be uncomfortable and are really important. And I really do think that is something that will continue throughout the future, because we cannot go back, and we cannot think that this is just something that somebody else has to deal with, because that's not your area of expertise. It's all of our expertise. It's our history, and we have to recognize it, and we have to learn from it. And, I really do think that that's a huge thing that districts are continuing to discuss is, how can we plan better and make better decisions for the future?
I am a part of the local school district here. We're in we call it Disabilities Work Group, and it consists of parents, teachers, different administrators, district administrators. I'm not even sure how I got on the committee besides I work in special ed, but they thought it would be a good idea to be on the committee. In our conversations that we've had, I want to expand it beyond just kind of systematic racism. And the reason why is because one of our work group members is a high school student. I think he's in the 11th grade, autism, and he is a solid advocate for all students, and particularly students with disabilities of all type. He's led conversations when it comes to kind of the ideas of ability and ableism, along with the intersection of ableism and racism that occurs in the school district. And those conversations have been insightful for all of us on the panel, because he's not the only student. It's like 2 or 3 students, but they are really powerful advocates, in kind of really strong opinions and thought leaders. And for lack of a better, they're thought leaders. And part of those conversations that they have initiated or participated in or led or even brought to the table have included, how are we looking at restorative justice practices? Are we doing them well in the school district? Is it just, okay, well, 2 students got into an argument, or one was mean to the other one, and we make that one apologize, and they were the first to say, no, that shouldn't be a thing. That's not restorative practices. That's setting up kids for disaster. And once they articulated their point, this was a very good point. They were right. And we as a work group looked at that to make suggestions to the district. The need for, or how do we reimagine or retrain or rethink about student resource officers? And a whole bunch of other kind of things. And it reminded me of, the idea that there is this kind of this intersectionality when it comes to isms, just isms in itself. And I'll put something in the chat about it because of the conversations I had with these students and with this work group. A friend of mine and I wrote a very small little piece about institutional isms, all types: racism, sexism, ableism, and how they look in schools. It's 3 pages. It's just a little thing we put together, but it was really opening up that conversation to think about how these things intersect and what we should do about them. And again, these ideas were sparked by students who we were having these conversations with. So it is, I think, hopefully we're in a place where, at the very least, because again, there's no one answer, no one right answer, but if we can start with an honest conversation, then we can go from there. But it has to be honest and above board, and hopefully free of agenda. If we can do that, then we can start, really making inroads and addressing some of these issues. And I think in some cases, some places and some school districts have. And I think there is a lot to go in some, as with everything, some districts are ahead of others. And there are a number of ways to get to addressing whatever ism it is. Because I think there's not a lot, but there's research to suggest that, sexuality in students with disabilities is an issue. Clearly, students with disabilities and race is an issue. just the idea of how we look at students with disabilities, or how, not we, maybe not this group, but others, that ableism is also important. So, you know, we can make inroads, we can make moves, and we can make change happen. And I think hopefully, because of the things that have happened along with the pandemic and along with kind of these social justice issues happening in confluence, you know, we can really start having honest conversations about these things and these intersections of things.
Great. And I love the point that the high school students in the group are leading the discussion, that they're the ones. And I think sometimes we do have to remember that kids get it. They get it. They understand that, you know, equality and equity are not the same thing. They're much quicker to understand that, you know, we need to be more open and inclusive than many of the adults in the room. So I love that point. We're quickly running out of time. I do appreciate, I love this conversation, and I really appreciate Shanna, JT participating with us, and everyone. I think we hit over 100, maybe over 100 participants. I hope you enjoyed the session and got from it something to take into the rest of the day, the rest of the year, and into next school year. I put on the last slide our contact information as well as our Twitter handles. I'm slowly joining into the world of Twitter and trying to get over, I think, over 50 people following me. So please help me in my effort. Well, I'll leave that up for a minute. Julie, do you want to lead us from here?
I will. I want to thank you so much, all of you, Lucky, JT, and Shanna. I thought that was a very organic conversation that brought up a lot of great points. Certainly made me think about a lot of different options, and we really appreciate you sharing your observations and experience and research with us. I also want to thank our captioner, Annette Blau, who has been quietly taking care of this for us and making it accessible for everybody. So thanks, everybody. The next session starts in 15 minutes at 2:30. So we look forward to seeing everybody in those sessions. Thank you again, and take care.